Boys, I'd like you to meet Tanya.
Hello, gentlemen.
Tanya's the best we have. She can kill a man 15 different ways with her bare hands, so a word of advice, don't get on her bad side.
Commander, the Soviet general you beat back at Brighton Beach has retreated to the south of France. He captured Cannes and kidnapped all our brass down there. I'll take out their naval port, but you'll have to take care of the rest.
Video games are a harsh business. With development requiring a lot of time and money, it seems developers are only a few poor decisions or bad games away from financial ruin. Other times, we see viable developers shut down mid-project by their parent company for no apparent reason. Welcome back to Game Gentleman. This week we take a look at 5 great video game studios that are sadly no longer with us. Before we get started, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Number 5. Westwood Studios. The first studio on our list is the Las Vegas-based Westwood Studios. Formed in 1985 as Westwood Associates, the studio would be renamed when it merged with Virgin Interactive Entertainment in 1992. Starting its existence with porting 8-bit games to 16-bit platforms like the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST, the studio would make its first original title in 1988 called Mars Saga. Westwood would develop games for companies such as EA, SSI, Infocom and Disney, and built a reputation of not only developing games on time, but developing good games on time. Westwood Studios was known for developing solid role-playing games with notable titles such as The Legend of Kyrandia and Dune 2. But the game series they're most well known for is the Command & Conquer series, developing 5 games under the franchise in the time the studio was around. Westwood Studios, along with their sister company Burst Studios, were purchased by Electronic Arts in 1998 for a sum of $122.5 million. While Westwood founder Brett Sperry was reportedly able to keep EA at arm's length for a while, after a number of titles which did not meet sales expectations, EA announced it would be shutting down Westwood Studios along with EA Pacific and merging them into EA Los Angeles in 2003. And this definitely won't be the last time we hear of EA closing a studio. Number 4. Pandemic Studios. At the time that EA was purchasing Westwood Studios in 1998, a small Los Angeles studio was just getting their start. Pandemic Studios was started by former Activision employees Josh Resnick and Andrew Goldman with an equity investment by their former employer. Pandemic Games would develop titles including Star Wars Battlefront 1 and 2, the original Battlefront series, not the recent EA titles, Dark Reign 2, Destroy All Humans, the Mercenaries series, and the Saboteur. Pandemic would also open up a studio in Brisbane, Australia in the year 2000 and develop the game Army Men RTS. Pandemic's success would see it enter in a partnership with BioWare in 2005 in an agreement which would allow both studios to retain their brands and IPs. This partnership would later be acquired by Electronic Arts in January 2008, and less than 2 years later, in November 2009, Pandemic would be one of a number of studios that would face closure as a result of EA laying off 1,500 staff. Only 35 of the studio's 228 employees remained with EA and were absorbed into their EA Los Angeles studio. Number 3. Neversoft. If you're currently enjoying the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake, you have Neversoft to thank. Formed in 1994 and finding their start by developing a licensed game for Playmates toys based on the toy line Skeleton Warriors, Neversoft would move on to 2 projects which would be cancelled before release and would bring the studio close to the edge of collapse. It wasn't until 1998 that Neversoft would meet with Activision about work on a previously cancelled project called Apocalypse. During the development of Apocalypse, Neversoft was roped in to develop a prototype skateboarding game, and once Apocalypse was finished, the team could move its focus to what would eventually become the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Activision and Neversoft knew that they were onto something good with Tony Hawk's, and the developer would publish a new entry to the franchise between the first title in 1999 and Tony Hawk's Proving Ground in 2007. In this time, Neversoft also developed Spider-Man in the year 2000 and the game Gun in 2005. After Activision acquired the Guitar Hero franchise in 2006, NEVERSOFT would develop Guitar Hero 3 and become the primary studio for developing the rhythm games up until 2010's Guitar Hero Warriors of Rock. NEVERSOFT would go on to contribute work on Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 and Call of Duty Ghosts before being merged with Infinity Ward and officially closing in 2014. Number 2. LucasArts. The history of LucasArts is worthy of a video of its own, but in short, the studio started in 1982 by none other than George Lucas himself as an offshoot of Lucasfilm. George Lucas was interested in exploring other areas of entertainment and had developed both Lucasfilm Games and a graphics department which would ultimately become what we know today as Pixar. Over its 31-year history, LucasArts would be responsible for developing over 70 titles, either on its own or in collaboration, and would publish and license many more. However, one of the most interesting factors in its development journey was the fact that they had initially licensed the rights to Star Wars games to Atari, which would force them to create new and original IPs, many of which we would likely never have seen otherwise. Aside from the Star Wars and Indiana Jones titles closely associated with Lucasfilm, LucasArts are perhaps most fondly remembered for their point-and-click adventure games of the 90s, including Manic Mansion, Loom, The Secret of Monkey Island, Sam & Max, Full Throttle, and Day of the Tentacle. After the acquisition of Lucasfilm by media giant Disney, the LucasArts name was kept for licensing purposes only, but development of all games was stopped and projects cancelled, including Star Wars 1313 and First Assault. Disney would go on to make a deal with EA for the rights to develop and publish Star Wars games for a period of 10 years. Number 1. Visceral Games. Our final entry is another studio which falls under the umbrella of Electronic Arts. However, unlike our previous entries, Visceral Games was conceived in-house at Electronic Arts under the name EA Redwood Shores. EA Redwood Shores would debut with their title Future Cop LAPD and would go on to develop Tiger Woods PGA games, racing games, James Bond 007 titles, and entries into the Sims franchise. It wasn't until Redwood Shores would develop brilliant sci-fi survival horror game Dead Space that the studio would be rebranded as Visceral Games. Visceral Games would largely become dedicated to third-person action games and would expand its operations to include Visceral Montreal and Visceral Melbourne. Visceral would develop sequels to Dead Space, Army of Two: The Devil's Cartel, and God of War clone Dante's Inferno, as well as expansions and DLC for The Sims and Battlefield titles. Visceral's final published game would be Battlefield Hardline, which took the familiar mechanics of the Battlefield franchise and centered it around a cops vs robbers story. After Battlefield, and coinciding with the deal made between EA and Disney for the rights to make Star Wars games that we mentioned earlier, Visceral was tapped to make an open world game set in the Star Wars universe. EA had even poached Amy Hennig from Naughty Dog to write the story for this new project. The project and Visceral Games would eventually be shut down by EA in late 2017. EA cited feedback from play testers and wider shifts within the marketplace towards experiences players could come back and enjoy for a long time, which is PR speak for shifting the game away from a single player narrative focus and into something more like a live service title that EA could easily monetize. So that's our list of 5 great game studios that are sadly no longer with us. Are there any developers on this list that you wish were still around? Let us know in the comments below. As there are so many developers we could have added to this list, we will follow up with a second list video in the coming weeks. Be sure to subscribe so that you're notified when we post. This has been GameGentleman, and thanks for watching.